Good morning, everyone. We're continuing with our roadmap for right living, which is the 52 qualities described in Swami's wonderful book, Affirmations for Self-Healing. So let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Bless us with deep attunement, with your guiding presence within, that in everything we do, we may see the bright light of your presence and follow with courage and joy the path that you lay out before us, because we know that in following your will, all that we long for will come to us. Om. Peace. Amen. We are talking about the subject of love. I think this is our third session on this subject. Yesterday, when I started reading Swami's paragraph, and I came to the first sentence of the second paragraph out of 3, we can never know love if we try to draw others to ourselves, nor can we find it by centering our love in them. I went on a little journey and ended up talking a great deal about soulmates, because most people, many people, think about love in terms of personal fulfillment through often a romantic, intimate relationship, when it just seemed that I needed to address that whole issue before I could go on to anything else, because we can never know love if we try to draw others to us, nor can we find it by centering our love in them. This is not how we mostly think. You know, I've been living with this book that Swamiji wrote as a weekly reading. These paragraphs are read every year for the last, since 1988 or so, decades. And each sentence has always been so enormous and profound to me. And then we sort of read the description, then we go and do the affirmation. But it seems to me that the power of the affirmation and the prayers that follow would be greatly enhanced by a much deeper understanding of what it is that we're even affirming. So that's I've wanted for years to do this that I'm doing now, and that's why I'm going very slowly. So we think that we'll get love when we get somebody to love us. I mean, what could be more natural? You get a friend, or you get a romantic partner, you get a baby. A lot of people imagine, well, if I have a child, then somebody will love me. Because children do give this extraordinary unconditional love to their parents as a rule. And for a very long time, that child is really dependent on the parents and doesn't really have the concept of another reality. I remember once seeing this family, mother, father, and a couple of other siblings. There might have been other relatives. And just as it had happened, all of them were obese in an extremely unhealthy way. They all were more than overweight. It was obviously a family karma, physiologically or whatever it could be. And in the midst of them was a small child, and that child was too small to have gotten into the family karma yet. And it was just so interesting to see, just look, that little one was running around loving everyone, and much too small and young to have any objective perception of the challenging family karma that the whole group was facing. And you could see that the obesity was a symptom of some other difficulty in coping with the world, which was causing health and all these other issues. But it's just like there's the little child, but the child is so free and so happy, and sometimes people have multiple children because, you see, after a short period of time, they stop being so small, and they start becoming themselves again, whatever that might be, and who they are is not always as pleasant. Who they actually are is not always as pleasant as it is when they're under your control. And of course, children are small and can just be picked up like a sack of potatoes and taken everywhere. And so there's this illusion that it's always going to be this way. And it's so intoxicating. I remember when I still lived at Ananda Village, I was sitting on the porch of what was then the publications building, which is now Hansa Temple, for those of you who've been there. And it's up on a hill, and it commands a view of the whole area we call downtown Ananda, which doesn't look anything like a downtown, but it's just where the market and the offices and the mailroom is. And I was sitting up there on the balcony, which is no longer, they've taken it off the building. And I was just watching, and a friend of mine, he pulled up his car, and he was about maybe, I don't know, the distance of the driveway, which is maybe 50 yards from the market to where he parked his car. He parked his car. His 5-year-old daughter, who was adorable, saw him, and she started screaming, as children can do, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." And without stopping the screaming, which I could hear up on the hill, she ran as fast as she could to where he was and then just launched herself into his arms, knowing full well that he would catch her. It was wonderful to see. It brought tears to my eyes. It was, I knew the father and the child, and they were very dear to me. But I also thought, oh, how intoxicating this is, and how intoxicated one can become on that kind of love. My father had great love for me. We were very close when I was growing up. But I knew that my life was not going to be connected to him after that. And it still causes me enormous pain, honestly. It's one of the most painful memories I have when I was about 18. And it became apparent to my father that I was going to leave and I wasn't going to come back. And I did leave and I didn't come back. We remained cordial, and I did my best to be kind and respectful to him, but my life didn't belong to him. My life didn't belong to the life he was living. I was destined for something completely else. And when I was 18, I didn't know what it was, but I knew that it wasn't what I'd had up until then. And of course, as I got more mature, I began to really see the whole thing. Or, we have romantic love, we have friendship love, we have fraternal love, whatever it might be, and we center our lives in the other person. Now, you see, it's very subtle, because we can serve someone and we can love them completely. But when our happiness is dependent on how they reciprocate or relate, what starts out as being deeply fulfilling has within it the seeds of its own catastrophe. Now, nobody wants to think like this. Nobody wants to believe it. Swamiji said these things over and over again when I was growing up spiritually, and I never believed him. It's just as simple as that. I knew he was telling me the truth, but I never believed him. I remember on one occasion, Swami said something to me that just sounded so, the only word I can use is cynical. And I said, "Oh, sir, that's so cynical." And he just looked at me and he said, "You'll see," just like that. And Swami wasn't cynical. He just was watching it. The father and daughter scene that I witnessed did not maintain itself, to the end of the father's life. It just didn't. It couldn't. So we try to draw people to ourselves. We can never know love if we try to draw others to ourselves. If, in other words, our reason for loving them is because it's going to make me happy. It's going to do something for me. And you see, this is the subtlety. Of course it will bring us joy. But the degree to which our own inner happiness depends on someone else conforming to what I need. You know, and people are very astute. You start trying to help people to behave in the way they ought to behave, they can tell whether it's about their happiness or yours. And a tremendous amount of disharmony comes. Is it your happiness or mine? A young man told me once how overprotective his mother was. And he said, and very astutely actually, because of the fact that I've been part of the same spiritual family for 50 years, I have multi-generational experiences where I have independent friendships with two generations. So I get to see it from both sides. And when this young man was talking to me, it was like, and what he said quite simply is, she's always trying to protect me from situations that she wouldn't be able to handle. He says she fails to appreciate how energetic, creative, and the word he wanted to use was, I don't mind a little chaos. Whereas at her stage of life, and actually her temperament in general, you know, she didn't have that much energy and she had a very low tolerance for chaos. Whereas for him it was perfectly fine, for her it was catastrophic. Who was she taking care of? Of course it was well-meaning, but it wasn't related to him. We're trying to draw people to ourselves for our own reasons. And then he says, nor can we find true love. Swami doesn't qualify it, but true love meaning lasting, eternal, unchanging love, by centering our love in them. In fact, very often people have to repudiate that kind of love because it's suffocating, it's confining, it limits one's own development because one always has to be, you know, conscious of what the other needs. You know, America is a very fragmented society in terms of holding families together generationally. And it's expected in our culture that, you know, 18, 19 years old, you just go out the door and you don't come back. In many other cultures, even still today, you stay home until you marry. Often you bring your married partner into your house. You stay in the neighborhood. And people, the older generation guides the younger generation. Even, I live in the Silicon Valley where we have many people who are from China or from India. And it's really impressive to me, because I'm an exceedingly independent American in my way of thinking, that the middle-aged parents, even of teenage children, will still be having their own lives and their children's lives guided by grandparents who are in China or grandparents who are in India. Those are the two countries that I particularly know. It might be happening in others. You know, where the decision that the parents make in California for a 14-year-old child is made by grandparents 10,000 miles away. Now, to my way of thinking, it's just like really incomprehensible. And on the other hand, I can also see it as being admirable. I'm not stupid to see what can also be there. But it also is a very limiting thing, because then the generations can only follow the path that the older generation understands. And in an age changing as wildly as ages are changing now, Swamiji said one of the very interesting things that happened in India, which is a culture he was very familiar with, is that, you know, the generational authority was being passed down because the older generation knew about the context of the next generation. But technology really shifted that, because your grandchildren can be extremely knowledgeable in a world that your grandparents literally cannot comprehend. They have no idea what it is. And so it in and of itself, it's beginning to break that. Now, it's tragic, and it's also intensely liberating, because all of a sudden options are possible that you were just too confined to have before. So what it says, nor can we find true love by centering our love in others, because then we become vulnerable. But you see, you don't do it just because you're vulnerable. You do it because it's limiting. And here's where the rest of the paragraph goes. For love is infinite. It is never ours to create. We can only channel it from its source in infinity to all whom we meet. See what happens when we try to draw others to ourselves. You love me. Then love becomes how you feel about me. And when you don't feel about me the way I want you to feel about me, suddenly love disappears. And when you no longer find in yourself to love me, you don't know what to do about it. You're not trying to hurt me. But since it was all about you and me, if that ephemeral reality shifts, I love you because you behave a certain way, because you're attractive to me in this way, because this is what you do, and we like to ski together and we like to go camping, but now you've broken your leg and you can't do it anymore. Whatever it might be, all of those limiting conditions will not necessarily stand up against the ever-changing reality of life. And so we only have it as long as the conditions of you and me fit. And if my concept of love is I can love if my baby is there, if my baby loves me back, if you treat me the way I want to treat you, if my mother is still alive, my love is centered in that person. And if something happens to that person, then my love disappears with it. And it's, first of all, how much, it's small. It's very small. And it's totally dependent on things agreeing with me, which is very impractical. That's the problem with it. It's very impractical. And also because we imagine a level of ultimate fulfillment. We want infinite fulfillment from a finite source. And here's an interesting part of it, and this is how it all comes together, how the human heart is not really going to be tortured by all of this. It's going to be liberated. To the novice yogi, this all sounds so intensely unattractive. Who wants it? And many people just reject the whole path of self-realization out of hand because of statements just like this, which we don't understand, because we think we're losing, not gaining, because the immediate satisfaction that we get from drawing people to ourselves and centering our love in them seems too desirable. Why would we even think about not having it? Now, Swamiji made a very interesting statement, which is very important. He said, we learn a certain amount from having our desires thwarted. When we want something and we don't get it, we have at least the opportunity to learn about life and where happiness comes from and what causes suffering. But we learn more, Swamiji said, from having our desires fulfilled, which is why our karma compels us. It compels us to marry. It compels us to have children, to earn money, to build a home. We're compelled by our karma to quest with great energy after those very things which the principles themselves tells us are not worth questing after. Because we don't learn because somebody else tells you. We learn because we have the experience, and after we have the experience, we actually really know. So disappointment teaches us something. But when we have our desires fulfilled, this is what happens. We say, oh, that was wonderful. You know, this meeting my true life companion at a young age and having 60 years of wonderful life together, you know, what a gift it was. But is the deepest longing of my soul completely fulfilled by that experience? No. It just simply isn't. But that doesn't mean that that experience wasn't glorious. That experience could have been glorious. We have wonderful children. We have a beautiful home. You know, sometimes we have good karma lifetimes where it all just works out. And if we don't get those desires fulfilled, A part of us always believes and always thinks, well, those yogis don't know what they're talking about. But then when we actually have the experience, we say, oh, I understand. This is beautiful. And this is even more beautiful. And more than that, it's like we are made a certain way. And the way Master himself put it, human love perfectly expressed is almost the same as divine love. But that almost is just enough to make us say, well, that was wonderful, but is there more? So that's where Swami says, love is infinite. It is never ours to create. It isn't about you loving me and me loving you and you being such a great product of my parenting or whatever it might be, or me being such a grateful daughter for your parenting or whatever it might be. It's not like it was created by those human experiences. See, we think it's not there. Somebody loves me, now it's there. But it's not created by those experiences. It simply exists. It's a vibration in the universe that we allow ourselves to experience because now there's some form for it. It is infinite, which is to say there's no boundaries to it. We may think it's lost if this person dies, but it's not lost at all. The form of it has shifted, and there may be great sorrow in that loss, but love itself is not lost. Where did it come from in the first place? A friend of mine whose husband died, well, two women I know whose husbands died. The first one, people would say to her, I'm so sorry you lost your husband. And she began, she was a very deep devotee, and she was very sad when her husband died. He was, relatively speaking, young, and she was very sorry about it. But when people would say, you lost your husband, she said to me, I don't think she always said it to the face of someone, but she said to me, she says, it's not like a wallet or something I left in the department store. She says, he's not lost. I know exactly where he is. She said, he's just not here. And it was a very interesting way to put it. He's just not here anymore, but that doesn't mean he's lost. And the other woman said to me, she said, communication with him used to be easier. She said, I can still communicate with him, but it's more difficult. She said it was easier when he was living in a body and we could just talk, But love is infinite. We didn't create it. It wasn't because we created something between us that now we have love. Love is always there. And it says we can only channel it from its source in infinity to all whom we meet. I remember when I was very young at Ananda, and there were two women in my life, and one of whom I had this wonderful, effortless, deep friendship, and the other one was a karmic enemy. And even though in a strange way, because we were united by our spiritual aspiration, we were soul sisters, but we didn't like each other. We didn't get along. It resolved eventually, but it was tempestuous until it did. That was when I realized that there's no such thing as time, that unresolved emotional conflicts are, as whatever the cause, even if the cause was hundreds of years ago, which in that case I believe it was, it might have, the antagonism, the injury done to one another might as easily have happened in the morning. I mean, it was so real because it was totally unresolved. So I said to Swamiji, the problem is not, this was my theory about how to resolve this, because I was always on this roller coaster. I said, the problem is not that I have this antagonism toward one, the problem is that I have too much love for this one. So if I love this one less, then the contrast would be less. And that was when Swami said to me that that was the stupidest idea he'd ever heard. At least, I had the distinction of being one of the stupidest ideas he'd ever heard. If I'm going to, I can be excellent even in the bottom of the heap. But in any case, and then he said, and it was beautifully expressed, he said, those effortless opportunities to love someone are to show us what's possible. So they're a gift. We shouldn't reject them. We shouldn't hold ourselves aloof. We shouldn't close our hearts when we suddenly find ourselves in the company of one of those, in the presence of one of those effortless flows of love. We don't create it. It comes to us from the infinite. And if all of a sudden a door opens and we can just love with our whole hearts, of course we're supposed to do that, because that shows us what's possible. And this is how Swamiji says, love is infinite. It is not ours to create. We can only channel it from its source in infinity. And then it says, to all whom we meet. So the difficulty is not giving our hearts fully and completely. It's thinking that I can only give it to certain select ones. Now, of course, we have to be appropriate. Every relationship has its context. Raising a child has its context. Being a husband or a wife has its context. Being a mother or a father has a context. And you have to be appropriate within that context. I mean, some people take these teachings and they become, for example, quite promiscuous. But that's not at all what's intended, because that's then again drawing it for what can I get for myself. Or they become very fickle in their affections, thinking that they're being universal. There's divine laws of the way we are made that also have to be followed. But our mistake is to think that there's only so much love in the world and we have to dole it out. But we get afraid, we get hurt. When you open your heart, you become very vulnerable. Swamiji in his life had this very strange karma where the people that he was very close to for his first 15 years after he became a disciple, which is when he met Master at the age of 22 and joined the monastery from 1948 until 1962. He was part of this monastic life and this monastic community, and he gave himself to it without reservation. And he had, profound and deep friendships with some of the senior monastics, from some of his peers. And then, karma just came in, and he was expelled from that organization, and he was exiled completely from contact with all those people. Not only did he love them, but he respected them and allowed them to guide him to a certain extent spiritually, and it never reconciled. Those people became his self-declared, irreconcilable enemies and detractors for the rest of his life, to the end of his life. And so he had to make some profound decisions about their point of view toward him was no secret, and it was utterly dismissive and denigrating. But how was he going to feel toward them? And it was a sadhana for him. It was a very big sadhana for him to be able to maintain his positive his positive feeling toward them. And he succeeded completely. But the way he said it is, what if I allow my feelings toward them to be dictated by their feelings toward me, and if I stop loving them merely because they have stopped loving me, he said, I lose twice. I lose because I've lost their friendship, and I lose because I have lost my ability to channel infinite love. And I say again, it was not easy for him, but he held to it. And even, very interesting, over periods of time, when the depth of their antagonism gradually revealed itself, and various nefarious things were done in the name of what they thought was a good idea. He said, I don't respect them as I used to respect them. He said, but I still love them. You see, that's sort of how you understand it. You don't have to be blind in your love for people. You can see what you're dealing with, and then love becomes a conscious choice, because love is infinite. We don't create it. We just channel it to all whom we meet. Is that simple? No. Is it worth cultivating? There is nothing more important to cultivate than to be a channel for infinite love to all whom we meet. God bless you, my friend.